Okay, and then um, Marie, I'm going to make you the host. Okay,
Okay.
so that when I leave, you'll be in charge, and then you just need to end the recording is the biggest thing.
Okay. I will.
Okay, so I'm just going to make you the host. Make host. Change host. All right. So it is 2:01. Shall we start?
Mhm.
Everyone, we can start with a moment of silence. We're all in shock a little bit here. And for those who haven't heard, our colleague and friend and fellow Rogerian, Wyona Freystingson, apparently died in Norway while she was at the conference that Richard was also at, the caring conference that was held in Norway over the, last week. And we really don't have any news or information, but my thoughts, prayers, and heart are going out to Iona and her family. And maybe we could just all take a moment to remember and think of her as she is in this time of transition. Okay, so we're here, 11 of us, and Nancy had wondered if we wanted to continue on today, and I think we should. Um, and the recording is on, so I think we can go for as long as people want or as much as people feel comfortable. And if we need to stop early, we can do that. But we do have the recording. I personally, Leslie, have to leave at about 2:30, and I'm sad about that, but I overbooked myself. But Marie is here, and Marie will be taking over. So if we're having a discussion and somebody needs to be checking the chat and watching the hands go up, Marie will be handling the meeting once I leave. And so thank you, Marie. And with that, I would like to turn it over to our presenters again, Nancy France, who has been with us through all of the dialogues, and then her colleague, Karen Avino, is joining us today. And the theme for today is Behold Pattern. So welcome, Nancy and Karen. Thank you.
You, Leslie.
Thanks, everybody. Um, so I'm Nancy, and my co-host today is my friend and colleague, Dr. Karen Avino, who is the CEO of the Integrative Nurse Coach Academy, positioned in Miami, Florida. So Karen, here we are again on another journey.
Yes, yes. Um, Meeting Nancy was life-changing. I've been on a long journey with Nancy, learning all about theory and developing theory. And that's why we're so excited today to be able to share with you the work that we've been doing. I'm also the president of the International Nurse Coach Association. I will say that nurse coach is growing by leaps and bounds, and it's very exciting because the nurses are really finding job enjoyment now with what they're doing by incorporating this either into their present role or starting their own practice. So we want to share with you today what we've developed. It's very exciting to us, and it's a way that nurses really are able to integrate this into their practice in a way that's understandable. And so, I guess that's it, Nancy.
Well, you say understandable. So remember our last dialogue, we talked about how we have to be multilingual. And so
Right?
we have to remember that too as we go through this. Okay. All right. So just as a reminder, all things Rogerian is powered by the 2026 year of the fire horse, dynamic time symbolizing energy, transformation, independence, and new beginnings, marked by powerful yang fire energy that fuels change. Expect a shift to a year of action, growth, and expanding horizons with an emphasis on nurturing relationships, turning ideas into reality, and embracing dramatic shifts. The energy shift is manifested within pattern. So the purpose of this dialogue is to share how the patterns of knowing, grounded in the philosophy of nursing, give substance to, according to John Phillips' words, the wholeness of knowledge of the science of nursing, guiding the praxis of nursing. But before we begin, we need to review, understand, and appreciate philosophy. What are the philosophical patterns of knowing? Where do we come from? Where do they come from? And how do they guide the praxis of nursing? Whenever we start talking about science and theory, etc., we get the rolling of the eyes and some deep sighs because students and nurses just want to get to the point. They want to get to the meat. Just tell me what it is I need to know. So Phillips tells us 4 things. The time is right to behold pattern, the distinguishing characteristic of energy fields, both human and environmental. It is through pattern manifestations that changes in energy fields are experienced and which provide clues to what the field pattern is like. The principle of integrality makes explicit the mutual human field and environmental field process involved in pattern changes. And one needs to recognize that patterning is an active process relative to one's participating knowingly in change. So you will notice that in this dialogue, I pretty much stick to the original words of authors, mainly John Phillips. Whenever we try to paraphrase or worse, reduce to make something simpler, we change the meaning, the purpose, the essence. So here again are John's words for pattern, meaning, purpose, and the integrality of nursing praxis. The recognition of the pan-dimensional wholeness of the person gives credence to the pattern manifestations of hopes, dreams, goals, and visions. In helping people perceive this patterned wholeness, they can discover anew the meaning and purpose of the living dying process. Enriches their understanding of the growing diverse changes taking place in their lives. Phillips also tells us by helping people to participate knowingly in the patterning of their human and environmental fields, we enhance awareness of their potentials and how these potentials can be actualized. In this respect, health transcends manifestations of the body, mind, or spirit to focus healing energies to optimize potentials of the human energy field through participating knowingly in the patterning process. So why are these referred to as philosophical patterns of knowledge or philosophical patterns of knowing? The paradigm is the philosophy or worldview of the discipline of nursing. Philosophy is integral to all knowledge and has been used in patterning the universe of knowledge to create all of the sciences. Philosophy plays a vital role in nursing science. As Phillips states, it enables nurses to identify the patterns of knowledge in nursing science so that these patterns can then be experienced in practice. Nursing's philosophy serves as the ground for nursing, providing the philosophical foundation from which all nursing knowledge and action arise, action being practice, research, and education. So philosophy enables nurses to identify the patterns of knowledge in nursing science, according to Phillips. Patterns of knowledge, also known as patterns of knowing, need to be identified and created to give substance to nursing science. And from philosophy and Rogers' science of unitary human beings, patterns of knowing illuminate theory of nursing, guiding research, education, and practice, which is praxis. Now, John is quite clear. Nurses are called to both identify and create patterns of knowledge to give substance to nursing science. Importantly, this is not a linear step-by-step process. It is a mutual process of the nurse and environment, an ongoing relational unfolding that helps nurses better understand the wholeness of nursing knowledge. Phillips also is clear that the patterns of knowing form the structure of the discipline and inform nursing praxis. France and Avino expand upon the work of Gordon and France and state that patterns of knowing spiral within and through philosophy, Rogers' science of unitary human beings, and the theories of nursing, illuminating and guiding the nurse's knowing, doing, becoming of wholeness, and the alternating rhythms of healing and well-becoming in practice. Within pan-dimensional awareness, the nurse experiences patterns of knowing within the person-environment energy field. Gordon and France state that this is within the lens of knowing, doing, becoming that brings attention to what is not there or not being observed or experienced versus what is there and readily observable. Through and within the patterns of knowing, the nurse can see gaps, experience the alternating rhythms, and in mutual process knows the questions to ask. These questions help us to scrutinize our practice and what new or different knowledge is needed for praxis. Again, John reminds us, Phillips reminds us that patterns of knowing pervade all nursing science to help nurses create nursing philosophy and knowledge for practice. It is the nurse's pattern recognition, moving beyond facts and isolated theories, that accelerates the explication of nursing philosophy and knowledge. Carper published the foundational paper on the 4 patterns of knowing in nursing in 1978. Today, in 2026, there are 12 philosophical patterns of knowing. Gordon and France in 2024 and at nursology.net have expanded the definitions of several patterns, providing deeper meaning and application for nursing practice. 2 patterns deserve special note as recently evolved contributions, which will be presented more fully in a couple of slides. As our work is in press and this presentation is only an hour long, we're briefly presenting each of the patterns. Most tables that are published on the patterns of knowing present them very briefly, like just brief descriptions or definitions, and really with no application to practice or linking to other patterns. So we're going to kind of go through these, just highlighting one at a time maybe. So empirical knowing, the one thing here I wanted to point out is sometimes nurses seem to forget, and I'm a nurse, I include myself, that it's not just about numbers, but it's also about those documents that support what we do, like the Nurse Practice Act and the laws and those sorts of things. So, supporting sciences, yes, the regulatory documents, scope and standards of practice, but also the theories of nursing. These all come under empirical knowing. Personal knowing, is sometimes I think sort of glided over, but the guiding questions that help us in personal knowing is, do I know what I do? Do I know what I know? And do I know what I need to be integrally present and in knowing participation? aesthetic knowing. The guiding questions here are, what does this mean? It's finding the meaning of the experience with the person. And how is this significant? Interpreting the depth and importance of the experience. Spiritual knowing. We don't really have any guiding questions here, but it is integral with personal knowing. And there are some core dimensions that Willis and Leon Sheehan had pointed out, that the meaning and purpose is awareness of a greater reality, uplifting of the human spirit, and non-material spiritual qualities and experiences. Ethical knowing, we think this is simple, but again, it is focusing on the ethics of relationship, understanding what ought to be done, that's right and just in any nursing or nurse coaching situation. Is this right? Is this responsible? Emancipatory knowing, who benefits? What are the barriers to freedom? What's wrong with this picture? What changes are needed? Sociopolitical. This I found in students and in nurses. We're not very comfortable with sociopolitical knowing. And so I think it's because it's supposed to focus on the environment of care, not just the policies and institutional practices that influence nursing practice, but it's the policies and legislation where nursing practice influences and advocates for society and the betterment of persons. Narrative knowing, this is holding space for the person's story. Intuition, this is where integrality is manifested. Within this pattern, integrality is manifested within pattern recognition and revealing immediate understanding that unfolds in decision-making, empathy, and caring. And it's beyond conscious awareness. Unknowing. Choosing to be open in heart, mind, body, soul, to come to know the other in the moment. This is expanding upon Munhall's definition of unknowing as a condition of openness. Unknowing is not the same as not knowing. Unknowing is we intentionally set aside our bias, our prejudices, our preconceived notions to be open in heart, mind, body, soul, to come to know other in the moment. But not knowing is that the nurse has no knowledge of a situation or event. So they're not the same. The newly identified pattern of knowing is the pattern of knowing of neglect. And Francis Gordon identified this. It emerges from Nightingale's work. It's the awareness of potential harm from insufficient nursing care. So Nightingale's foundational lesson, the most important practical lesson that can be given to nurses and to teach them, is what to observe, how to observe, which are the evidence of neglect, and of what kind of neglect. So this pattern is for us with our professional conscience. It manifests the professional conscience of every nurse. Did I do enough? Was I intricately present? Did I miss something? Did I miss something the person said, wanted, or needed? Now, neglect here is not a legal term. It's a call to professional vigilance and compassionate attentiveness. It's not a legal designation. So Francis Gordon expanded the definition of technological knowing. It's the knowing, doing, becoming of how the nurse integrates in practice the use of technology and its data and coming to know the manifestation of the person's patterning. So patterns of knowing in nurse coach practice. Once again, Philip says, one needs to recognize that patterning is an active process relative to one's participating knowingly in change. Now we'll share how we recreated the philosophy of nurse coaching, integrating the patterns of knowing grounded in and spiraling through Rogers' science, and the theory of integrative nurse coaching, guiding the practice of the nurse coach. Karen, is this you or me?
I think I can do it. So, what we wanted to be able to do was take this beyond the classroom into practice, right? That's what nurses need to understand how to do that and what it means. So, we know that the patterns of knowing really emerge through the nurse coach's pan-dimensional awareness of an integral presence with the person environment energy field, creating knowledge that guides the praxis of nursing and nurse coaching as a soul whisperer. So the patterns of knowing are really not abstract philosophical concepts reserved for just the classroom. They're phenomena that inform really every encounter a nurse coach has with a person, family, community, or system. And because these patterns are interconnected, nurse coaches rarely observe a single pattern in isolation. Rather, they're aware of multiple patterns simultaneously, guided by the mutual process with the relationship of the nurse coach and the client. For example, the nurse coach practices the art of nursing by integrating this personal, aesthetic, spiritual, and ethical knowing. And as the nurse coach identifies and creates patterns of knowing, the nurse coach contributes to the science of nursing and to the practice of nurse coaching as we accompany people on the personal path of healing and well-becoming. So how did we get there? Philip said, the time is right to behold pattern, the distinguishing characteristic of energy fields, both human and environmental. So, how did we get there with the patterns of knowing to guide the nurse coach? Well, we didn't really just one day say, let's add the patterns of knowing to nurse coaching. We want to tell you our story. So, imagine inviting a couple of your colleagues to work with you in writing a book, and they jump in and rewrite the script for you entirely. And not only in taking over the direction of the book, but also the curriculum. So we wound up doing a revision of the curriculum according to it. So our first meeting really went like this. I thank my colleagues for agreeing to work with me. And then I hear, Karen, we need to ground this work in Rogers' science of unitary human beings. And we need to redefine the language, theory, and concepts with Rogers. This will really put integrative nurse coaching on the cutting edge. So we're on a Zoom call. Just imagine this. We all have our cameras on and I'm trying to mask my shock. I'm just speechless. But they think I'm fine with what they're saying, so they just continue on. We need to start a philosophy, clearly identify the unitary transformative paradigm and Rogers science as a science of nursing for nurse coaching. And this really won't be hard to do. We're already reading and rewriting it, and we'll rework the theory of integrative nurse coaching. So I kind of hit the mute button, right, and turned off my video and yelled to my husband in the other room, Tom, would you bring me a glass of wine, please? I really need it now. So the time is ripe to behold pattern, the distinguishing characteristic of energy fields, both human and environmental. So we started with what was already there, already established with the philosophy, the mission, and the theory of integrative nurse coaching. We were looking for the manifestations of patterns and rhythms. So the philosophy was more about the role of the nurse coach or motto, lifestyle modification, relationship-centered communication, recognition of the wholeness of people, person-centered care, integration of mind, body, spirit perspective of healing. So once again, we went back to Philip's words. What is philosophy and the purpose of philosophy? So one of the distinctive attributes of nursing philosophy is the coherence that it gives to nursing science. Philosophy enables nurses to identify the patterns of knowledge in nursing science. Patterns of knowledge, also known as patterns of knowing, need to be identified and created to give substance to nursing science. So nurses' identification and creation of this philosophical patterns of knowing is not a linear process, but a mutual process of the nurse and the environment so nurses can better understand the wholeness of the knowledge of nursing science. So the philosophy of integrative nurse coaching, it emerges then from Philip's work. The philosophy emerges from Rogers' theory and its foundational postulates and principles of homeodynamics. The philosophy guides practice. The nurse coach enhances the awareness of the client's potentials through the dimensions of the integrative assessment. And that includes Barrett's PKPCT, the Integrative Health and Wellness Assessment, and I would gather that those words are very familiar to our clients as well as you. So through and within the philosophy and pan-dimensional awareness of the patterns of knowing, the nurse coach can then guide the client in knowing participation towards healing and well-becoming. So nurse coaches recognizes the pan-dimensional wholeness of the person, giving credence to the pattern manifestation of their hopes, dreams, goals, and visions. In helping persons perceive this patterned wholeness, that we can discover really a new meaning and purpose of their living experience, because this riches then their understanding of the power as freedom with the diverse changes they choose taking place in their lives. So by guiding people to participate knowingly in the patterning of their human and environmental fields, the nurse coach can enhance that awareness of their potentials and how these potentials can be actualized. In this respect, health transcends really the manifestations of the body, mind, and spirit to focus healing energies to optimize potentials of the human energy field through participating knowingly and in the patterning process and change. So alternating rhythms of the reflexive process. As with most nursing programs, there were pattern manifestations of really an assortment of non-nursing language, content, and theories mixed together to define nursing practice, psychology, medicine, sociology, etc. But as we were being reflective and reflexive during our careful review, we could really tease out and separate the non-nursing content and see that Rogers' theory and the postulates in the background and the principles for homeodynamics sort of swirling around. So we brought them to the forefront, really focusing on the science and theories of nurse coaching and nursing, not the sciences and theories for nursing, which would be non-nursing, of course. So in our pan-dimensional awareness, we discovered how the patterns of knowing were really also integral to the work that we were doing. The philosophy of Roger science, the theory of integrative nurse coaching, and recreating the curriculum. So we moved from a mid-range into a grand theory. Of course, when we reviewed the current middle range theory of integrative nurse coaching that was originally developed by Dossi, Luck, and Schaub, we reimagined the theory as a grand theory of nursing, grounded in that unitary transformative paradigm and Rogers' theory. So, flowing from the philosophy of Rogers' science, postulates, and principles of homeodynamics, it became really evident how the patterns of knowing emerge through and within the nurse's pan-dimensional awareness of an integral present with the person, environment, energy field. And this created the knowledge to guide the praxis, really, of nursing and nurse coaching. So the patterns of knowing became the essence of theory-driven nurse coach practice, which supported the we call ILPHW, which is the Integrative Life Pattern and Health Well-Becoming Framework. And
Healing will be coming.
healing well becoming, it's a mouthful. And the model of well becoming within the nurse coach process. So the nurse coach reflects on their own and their clients' patterns of knowing, a reflexive process that in itself is an expression of that knowing, doing, and becoming. And now, as a grand theory from Tink emerges the integrative life patterning, healing, well becoming framework of nursing and the Inca model of well becoming. Prior to the first session, when we're seeing someone, the client completes the integrative health and well-being assessment, which is a self-assessment, and that helps really the client to see a snapshot of their whole being and their health. Clients also complete Barrett's Power of Knowing Participation in Change tool before the first session, and then again prior to the fourth and last session, if there's more. So the patterns of knowing application in practice is that the nurse coach's self-development really evolves from their own patterns of knowing. And the nurse coach guides the client session to session in discovering these patterns. And this helps us as nurse coaches to identify the gaps, discover new knowledge that supports the science and the theory. So as the nurse coach really identifies and creates the philosophical patterns of knowing, the integrative nurse coach bears witness and accompanies people on the personal path of healing and well-becoming. So we're going to take a little journey with a client and talk about what we call a nurse coach situation. It's also known as a case study in the medical model, but we no longer use that language. We are bringing nursing to the forefront. So the nurse coach situation is really adapted from Barry, Gordon, and King, who originally defined these nursing situations as an aesthetic expression of the shared lived experience between the nurse and the one nursed. And the nurse coach situation is integrated within our faculty mentor meetings with students to exemplify the patterns of knowing guided by Rogers and the theory of integrative nurse coaching of the nurse coach in the situation with the client. So each nurse coach situation has a title, and this one that we're sharing is Listening Between the Lines. And this tells an unfolding story within the nurse coach session and how that goes. So Michael is a 48-year-old high school teacher who recently received a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. Though not entirely surprised by the diagnosis, given his family history and his recent health assessment results, Michael feels overwhelmed by the lifestyle changes his primary care provider has recommended. As somebody prides himself on on his own intellect and scientific knowledge, Michael initially approached his diagnosis from a purely biological perspective, focusing on medication adherence and basic dietary guidelines, right? Which is most of our clients, right, that we see. Michael is married and has a golden retriever named Hank. and lives 50 miles from his nearest relatives. After struggling for 3 months with inconsistent glucose readings, difficulty maintaining recommended lifestyle changes, he sought out a nurse coach through his healthcare system's integrative health program. And he expressed frustration with what he called a fragmented approach to his healthcare and a desire to find more comprehensive ways to address his condition that aligned with his values, belief systems, and as an educator and lifelong learner. Initial coaching session, as Michael shows up into the nurse coach's office, the nurse coach greets him. So here's a synopsis of Michael's first session. Remember, he's a 48-year-old high school teacher, diagnosed with diabetes, seeks sessions with a nurse coach. So I'm a science teacher. I believe in numbers, facts, following protocols. But for whatever reason, I can't get my numbers down and I'm following all the rules, etc. My wife can't understand it either. I do not enjoy family get-togethers anymore because nobody understands why I can't eat that food. Food is a really important part of our family gatherings. Plus, I feel like I can't participate in teacher potlucks anymore without people noticing. I'm just so discouraged. So, as the nurse coach listens, he clearly observes Michael is comfortable with the patterns of empirical knowing, knowledge systematically organized into general laws and theories for the purpose of describing, explaining, and predicting phenomena. The nurse coach also observes aesthetic knowing as Michael describes his living experience of feeling isolated at family and work gatherings and being discouraged. So, aesthetic is as listening to the deep meaning of his living experience of anxiety and fear. Aesthetic knowing emerges in the core of human living experiences that are common for all persons: grief, joy, anxiety, fear, pain, hope, and love. So, throughout the other sessions, Michael identifies how he wants to include his wife in meal planning and asking his mom to adjust a couple of family recipes that he really loves to help meet his needs. And after the third session, he also said that he was ready to share with friends about his diagnosis. The nurse coach observes how Michael's patterns are expanding, personal knowing and a shift in aesthetic knowing from discouraged to being hopeful. So for the nurse coach, narrative knowing is the knowledge transmitted in stories that human beings have told each other since the beginning. This pattern is immersed within the fifth component of the grand theory of integrative nurse coaching, listening to the story with heart. The nurse coach who holds space for story honors the person's living experience as an essential source of knowing. Personal knowing as the nurse coach is also, the nurse coach is also diabetic. So when integrally present, the nurse reflects on their own interpretation and meeting of a particular situation with the living experience of the client and can relate. Following our nurse coach session, we have nurse coach session notes that mimic what we're looking for and being able to document and actually be able to talk the language of the patterns of knowing. So this is just the first page where we give a brief overall summary of the session. Just the basic patient information at the top, and then giving summaries of the integrative healing and wellness assessment, living with heart, nurse coach interventions, etc.
So Karen, I'm going to interject on this
Mhm.
front page here, because we kind of called it like demographic data, but this is not like an intake history at all like we do with other clients, like in the acute care system. This is like you ask the client, what is something about your health you would like for me to know? So we're not going through a systems approach. We're not, what's your diagnosis? What kind of medications are you on? Nothing like that. If the client wants to tell us about that, that's okay. But it's just basically, what do you want me to know about you? What would you like for me to know about your health?
The second page here you can see is our integrative and health wellness assessment. And you can see that we're documenting the patterns of knowing. What patterns is the client manifesting? We also do ingredients of caring. We can reconceptualize Maslow's human needs. We have a tapestry of culture. We look at the values in action, the strengths inventory. We look at integrality, intentionality, change, what perspectives emerged, their meaning, their bodies, their actions, shared meaning in relationships, their group processes, systems, structures, things like that. And then their relationships. We expand upon what emerged during the session. And in Michael's case, it was family and his wife and his mother and friends, certainly that he teaches with. And then relationships. And in below is the integrative life patterns, healing and well becoming image. And I've just made it larger for you on the side to see that the connections within this, we know that one can influence the other, but it's an important thing to understand that it is all part of the energy field. Okay, I think the next one, Nancy.
Well, I was going to say something about this framework because a lot of people say, well, this doesn't look like Rogers. Where's all this going? But again, remember the whole multilingual and how to talk with the client and help the client make connections. Like everything's a mutual process, everything's interconnected. And what you don't know for the rest of those sessions with this client, Michael, is the nurse coach actually shared the framework with the client and said, you're here on the biological endocrine sphere. And he looked at it and he's like, all of this is interrelated. My feelings, with my family, and it all affects my diabetes. So this is one of these things where it also guides the nurse in using Rogers guides this, but we always too have to integrate those sciences for nursing, the biology, the chemistry. But Rogers science guides how we do that. Okay. There you go, Karen.
And the last page shows the SMART goals and the progress tracking. Clients, as we said, also complete the PKPCT, which we document. And we share that with the client, after the first session and then after either their fourth or its last session to show them their change in power, over their choices and the things that they can do so that they feel more encouraged. So there's a separate component from the nurse coach note that's on the bottom, and that's the nurse coach self-reflection, because this is really where the nurse coach can reflect on how the patterns of knowing are evolving after each session and how to strengthen those patterns of knowing.
Within the
We
nurse
do, yeah, we do provide a space on the bottom for physical assessment. There are times when physical assessment is required by perhaps the organization that they're working in, because especially if they're a nurse practitioner, that may mean that they can bill insurance for the session. So I guess what we really wanted to, bring forth here was what we have learned from our students. In the beginning, some students were really questioning the relevance of patterns of knowing to nurse coach practice. Oh, theory, what is it? I don't need it. I don't understand it. It's out there. It's too out there for me. But their awareness really and their understanding expanded after knowingly participating in the nurse coach situations. And as they supported their clients in their power to make changes for these life patterns. And they've learned to practice the pattern of unknowing and how that has helped them really to become more aware and open in heart, mind, body, soul, to come to know another in the moment and see other patterns of knowing. So we have some references here that the work has come from. And thank you for attending. I think we are here to take some questions if anyone has any.
Thank you, Karen and Nancy. We have a question? Yeah, Megan, go ahead.
I'm not muted, right? You can hear me. Oh
We
my
can hear
God, ladies, that was magnificent. That was magnificent. Thank you so much for what you've done because and here's beautiful Barbie. Okay, Barbie, this is a coming together, an integrality of something that was meant to come together. And
Exactly.
it's so beautiful, Karen, what you've done and gone forward, and Nancy, how
Nancy.
you've informed it with and bringing John. I mean, the whole presentation, you honored John Phillips, which was stunning. I think what you're doing here is really advancing nurse coaching, and it's wonderful. And I feel so inspired by this presentation, and I recognize the hard work that it took to do this integration and synthesizing from all of you. Barbie, you too, it's wonderful. I'm thrilled. Having participated in the beginnings of the integral nurse coach, right? And living that and being a Rogerian at heart. This is a wonderful, wonderful. Thank you both very much.
Well, I have to say that in our story, I think Karen has never said it, but I think I'm the one that drove her to drink.
But I made it out alive, and that's what matters.
Karen, oh, yeah, go ahead, Barbara. I'm sorry.
I would just say it is absolutely thrilling. And our beloved Susan Luck is on the other side now, and she would just be so happy. She's singing. And so for y'all to take all of the threads and to look at transcend but to include, it's exactly where we need to go with integrative nurse coach movement now. I am in awe and I am so excited.
And I think just leading nurse practice, not just leaving it in coaching. This is a real paradigm for guiding nursing practice. And it's beautiful. Wonderful work. Aaron, Nancy, Barbie, all of you, and with John. That was great. Really, I'm so glad this is recorded. If I was teaching, I would use this recording and give students actually credit for their hour watching this and really being able to engage in dialogue and to pause the slides, take notes, really deeply reflect using all of these patterns. I'd like to hear a lot more about this evolution of patterns of knowing, the neglect. I thought about that and how much we can be dwelling with a pattern of knowing of neglect in what's happening in our world now in terms of the environment, in terms of toxicity, in terms of violence, and guns in school, and how to be practicing with AI. I have my private practice that I practice in this way, and I've just had such unbelievable experiences with some of the youth that are influenced now by social media, and what we can do living our work and how urgent it is now. So thank you so much for this. It was really fabulous, and let's keep going. It's so good to see all of you. And I would have adamantly argued if you had considered canceling this for today. So thank you.
And I will also say, publish this as an article as soon as you can. The depth of the work that you've done, and there are a lot of people out there that are looking at patterns, but the way y'all have wrapped it is just extraordinary. So publish, write it in as an article. Yes, it's going in the new textbook, but write it as an article as soon as you can.
It's written, Barbie. After we met when we met, I told Karen, I said, I'm writing.
Good,
and I
good,
sent
good.
it to her. So it's
Good.
written. We just have to submit it, tweak it, submit it.
And how to get it to as many as can see this, and Nursology even. I mean, different versions. I also loved in the display of the emerging theories as the dotted lines around.
Yes.
They were not closed; they were dotted. So there was real opportunity to convey mutual process through all of that. So great work.
Thank you.
If the article could have a little link where they could also watch this, that would be great too.
That's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
I really love the way that you guys were able to bring the patient into the discussion, and really, in the scenario, and having the patient understand all of the connections equally. I'm very curious and amazed about how you brought your students into this discussion, because as both of you said, bringing students into a way of talking about theory as being something that is in action, something they use, is difficult. And I guess I have a question. I guess to put it this way, how did you see your students becoming more conversant about this process as they saw the patterns unfold and as they began to see the connections? How did they themselves find themselves becoming conversant, or is that something you led them with, or any comments about that?
Do you want me to mention, Nancy?
I was just going to say that we meet every other week with our students. We call them faculty mentor meetings. And there's a nurse coach situation that they co-lead, so like a couple of them will read it. And we have prompts at the end to guide them in how they dig deep and reflect and step aside and stuff. Now it takes a while. I mean, so when I'm in a faculty mentor meeting, I will always say to them, this goes right back to Rogers. This is what Rogers is. And they're like, oh, and again, like that multilingual and reframing and translating. That's the other thing. You say this is what it means. Let's start using this language. So they're learning that, and they have their aha moments, especially in their own self-reflection and their own how if they're not right, if they're not good in their self-development and caring for self, which is what every nurse should know, right? We want them to know. They understand, I can't do this. I can't do this work. So it's a little bit of both of those things, how we are taking them along, explaining it, making the connections for them, and then they have their aha moments with their clients and then within our faculty mentor meetings. Karen, what were you going?
I was just going to say, because it's integrated, in every, as Nancy said, in every faculty mentor meeting, there's a different nurse coach situation that brings up different patterns of knowing and other things that are discussed and pointed out. And with time, then they understand. You have to remember this process wasn't easy because the faculty also need to understand it, right? And so there was, a learning curve for that. And that's still ongoing. But we actually, developed faculty guides, if you will, for each nurse coach situation that helps the faculty also then be able to identify those things and discuss it with the students in that way. So it's quite a change, from how we were doing it, but it makes more sense. They're understanding best than what the nurse coach's role really is, as well as, their nursing role if they're in a traditional nurse position elsewhere. And I think that, it also then, of course, transfers to the nurse themselves, for their understanding themselves more through this process by looking at others and sharing that experience, with them.
Can I just want to say, even the tools you develop, the assessment tools, right? What you do give to the client versus the coach's self-observation process, right? Just the tool itself expands consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
You're moving in the direction towards pan-dimensionality. So there's growth happening when somebody sits and just fills out the tools.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
struck me as I saw them. Yeah.
Yeah, all of them, even, the integrative health and wellness assessment from the very beginning when I first, it's definitely a teaching tool, and it's a self-assessment. So it's meant to not just, it's not all about the sum of the numbers on those, but what's most important to them and being able to identify that and use it as a teaching tool. So, yeah, it's, one of the things is, with the assessment, um, some feedback that you get from nurses, perhaps who are in traditional roles, will say, um, I can't, or we don't use that type of documentation where I am. And, a nurse practitioner might say, I need a soap note. I have to do a soap note.
And I
Um,
just nixed that right.
oh, you should have heard that meeting.
I said,
But that's the medical model. And we're really advocating for nursing here. We're not using the medical model, of care in this. So,
but they have to know the language. We as nurses, we have to know
right.
the language.
We are cross-cultural related to disciplines for sure. But it doesn't mean that's how we need to guide our practice, is through those methods. We need to guide our practice this way. So
I want to also give a shout out to Violet, because
mhm,
she gave us permission to use the PKPCT. And Violet, we got to start crunching numbers. We have a lot of data. So,
mhm.
yeah.
I think we have,
You say
we
a
have,
thousand?
Violet, just an FYI, I think we have about 1,300 tools completed already in that short amount of time. So there's a lot that we could do with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, in order to make this even more theoretically vibrant, if at some point you would consider going back to Barrett's practice methodology, linking it, paralleling it, and then showing how you're moving it forward and evolving it.
We might need some
Okay.
help with that.
Yeah, we'll come back to you.
Well,
Yeah.
one of the things that we have to help our nurse coach students understand is they are not psych mental health nurses. They are not therapists. And so another big part of the program is knowing when to refer, knowing when to identify that somebody needs somebody other than a nurse coach. So, because, we get excited sometimes and we think, oh, I'm going to do this. So, that's one of the things. But yes, I love your suggestion, Violet, and we may need your help with that.
Happy to.
Are you also having the nurse coaches use the power tool as well?
Yes, they have to do it in foundations
Before the course starts.
Before it starts, they do it at the end of foundations. Then they do it at the end of practicum.
Wonderful.
So we've got 3 measures on the students to see, you know. But you know, you talk about being conversant and fluent in the language. I'm not perfect, none of us are, but they're into it, you know. And so yeah, they can see how the process helps them, and they have a whole new understanding and appreciation about power.
Yes. Good.
The integrative assessment, like Karen was saying, you know, nurses are like physical assessment, checkbox, checkbox, checkbox. And that's why when they, you know, the nurse coach notes and the whole how big integrative assessment is, they're like, how am I going to do this? But you know, it's not, you're not doing check boxes. You are listening, observing, you're pan-dimensionally aware of what's going on here. And you're linking everything. So now it doesn't seem overwhelming to them because they realize that what they're doing. We help them understand the whole thing about caring. And in our first dialogue, Violet and I presented how Roger science tells us what is and how to with the caring piece, which is pan-dimensional awareness and knowingly participating. But we also brought in those ingredients of caring from Meroff for them, for themselves, but also in helping the client and caring for self. But again, they are grounding it in Rogers and then the theory of integrative nurse coaching. So they're seeing now, in my mind, what we're seeing, Rogers is the science of nursing, and we know how to support and integrate these other things that are important, but we have to ground them. We have to have that grounding.
Can you speak just a little bit more on that in terms of, and I'm not saying this is how you said it, but in my mind, it's kind of like, how long does it take? What effort towards getting students, in whatever capacity they're in, to move beyond the obsession with check boxes and doing things based on credentialing and such and so on. How did you see that unfold, moving them back, moving beyond it? Did they give resistance? Were they uncomfortable? Did they give you a lot? Are you sure we can do it this way? Or I don't know, what was that like?
Well, there's a lot of camaraderie and peer support. I mean, we keep our groups small, maybe 10 students, and then you had the faculty mentor. And so there's always some that are kicking and screaming, and I don't know if I can do this. Maybe this isn't the right time for me to do it. But they just trust the process, and they have to really practice that pattern of unknowing. I got to set this aside, but I've always known, and it has not really worked. So why am I hanging on to it, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, they're on a roller coaster, and they'll say I'm overwhelmed, but you see them transition, and they're feeling more comfortable. They're supporting one another. And then when they're with clients, just like remember when we were in nursing school and when we got to be with clients, like, yes, I did make the right decision, but yeah, there's a lot of alternating rhythms, but thank goodness they're not all in the naysayer bunch at one time, right? So they're really supporting and bringing each other along.
I think, it takes perhaps a little time, but because their faculty mentors are really on their journey with them in this, I don't think they feel that, occasionally, of course, we have our type A nurses who feel they have to know all the answers, before they come to a meeting, and then they get frustrated and anxious about doing that. But we've made it, a real place, a safe place to learn and to understand that. And I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Well,
I
I
wanted
am.
to,
Yes, please go ahead. I'm
oh,
sorry.
thanks. That's okay. I wanted to say, I think that some of your examples are just amazing. Your whole presentation was just magnificent. But the patient perspective of a confidence level to meet the goal, that's going to allow a student or other faculty members who I think would really be of great value in learning more about this and having it central, but thinking more about dwelling with the patient, examining their vulnerability, caring about their confidence level. I think those things are so important that really, disavows the checklist. It makes one understand that living and being with and the being part of caring with the patient then is going to be able to give you some information that will then help them along in perhaps building their confidence. So to me, I'm going to integrate this very deeply into the preparation of nurse faculty, because I think that that's very important in terms of nursing education for others. But thank you so much.
That's great.
All right.